to the latest Moviescramble podcast, in which we will be continuing our Universal Monsters box set. So today we'll be talking all things imperceptible, supernatural and unobservable. Yes, we are talking about James Whale's The Invisible Man and Paul Verhoeven's Hollow Man. And in case you're thinking, but wait, didn't Lee Whannell do an Invisible Man remake way more recently than Paul Verhoeven's film? You would be correct, but we covered that film way back on episode 18 of the podcast. I checked, that's how far back it is. So please be sure to check out that episode in amongst the dust of our archives. But in order to discuss all things invisible, I need someone to talk to. It would be a crime if he were made invisible, because then we would all be denied a glimpse of that hair. It's John. John, how are you?
I was wondering where you were going to go with Invisible Man, but and I thought it would be a lot creepier than what you
I kept it clean.
Yep, I am very well. I am just back from a week in Seville where I managed to not get sunburned, which is a major plus for myself. Yeah, because usually it's the back of my neck or one side of my face or something like that usually gets done, but no. Yes, totally refreshed, did lots of walking, so lots of exercise, and countered that with lots of cans and bottles of beer and things like that as well, and lots of not particularly healthy tapas because it seems to be everything's fried. But, it all works very nicely. How are you doing?
I am not back from a week in Seville. However, I did fall asleep in a roasting hot bath yesterday, so I looked very sunburned for the vast majority of the day. So, yeah, I've just been looking forward to obviously starting our collabs as well, which is coming soon. And of course, chatting about these films today, because, I love me a monster movie. So, yeah, let's get into it. The Invisible Man from 1933. Monsters Universe favourite, James Whale, is back in the director's chair for this adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel. The film follows the scientist Dr. Jack Griffin, who has discovered a way of turning himself entirely invisible. However, in his pursuit of the translucent, he becomes murderously insane, wreaking havoc and death on the small town that he finds himself in. The film stars the likes of Claude Rains, Gloria Stewart, yes, the Titanic lady, William Harrigan, Henry Travers, also known as Jimmy Stewart's guardian angel, E.E. Clive, the god-awful Una O'Connor, and a brief cameo from that other monster's favourite, Dwight Fry. So, Claude Rains delivers a performance that is almost entirely vocal, because for the vast majority of this film, we don't see his face because it's either in bandages or it is simply not there. How did you think his voice acting shaped such an iconic movie character?
He has a very unique voice and it works particularly well in that way. I did a wee bit of reading about Claude Rains at the time, and he was a well-known London stage actor, but he hadn't acted in any Hollywood films. And apparently he got the gig for The Invisible Man because he had done a screen test, which was not very good at all. But James Whale heard his voice and said, "That's the guy for me." And everybody went, "But he can't act, he's really terrible," and everything. And obviously it was just a bad screen test. He obviously can't act and everything. But it was the voice that he was looking for. He was looking for something that was a little different to what had come before in terms of scientist figures that they'd used in some of the horror films. Wanted something a bit more cultured. They didn't want Boris Karloff because he'd a bit of falling out apparently, and also they didn't like the idea of the fact that with him being invisible, all you would hear would be his voice with this slight lisp that he had as well, and felt that was a bit off-putting. So they went with the relatively unknown Claude Rains, and I think it works very well because he articulates particularly well here, and he is obviously making full use of his vocal talents, whereas he can't really do an awful lot of acting. I know, like human expression, human communication, 70% of it's non-verbal, so that's out the window completely when all you've got is a bandaged face and a pair of sunglasses. So how did you get past that? You make sure your voice is distinctive, you make sure that it works very well, and in this case it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Just does everything that you'd want to it, you know.
Yeah, I think his voice is like velvet. He's got those like sort of rolling R's. There's enough like of a sense of menace about it as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But also because, as you rightly said, like he has this theatrical background, so his articulation and his emphasis and diction is all spot on, and it lends itself to, you know, the character, because he is this scientist, so you would expect that he would be like very well educated, obviously very well to do, and so his vocal tone like really lends itself to who Griffin is, I think. And I honestly think it's one of the most distinctive voice performances. And there is a little bit of a nugget of trivia where apparently he took his daughter to like a re-release anniversary screening, and he went to the box office and went to order tickets, but the person who was obviously processing the sale recognised his voice and let him in for free. So that's how distinct it is. And I think that it's quite a bold move, because obviously, as you've said, like Claude Rains was relatively unknown, but I think using that vocal prowess to really drive this character works. And I think it's something that, as I'm sure we'll talk about with our other film, probably didn't get considered for later on. It was more about getting a star and turning them invisible, whereas this is definitely a dedication to his delivery. Because I think that Griffin's one of these interesting characters, like a lot of the Universal monsters, where he is a bit of a tragic figure, a bit of a villain, and a sort of comic or darkly comic anti-hero as well. So he's quite an unusual character in that sense, a bit like, you know, Frankenstein's monster, and that you're kind of rooting for him. How do you feel this character sort of comes across?
Yeah, he is a very sort of sympathetic character when he's not fully gripped by madness. He understands the situation he's in very well, and he struggles with it because he can't. He needs time to work out how he can actually reverse it. And he is, yeah, like you say, he's not really a villain in it for most of it. Yes, when he does turn to madness and he starts doing what he's doing to various people, and it gets more and more severe as the film progresses, then you've got less sympathy for him, because a lot of these problems are his own making because of the way that he acts. He initiates basically a manhunt from his own actions, whereas if he'd kept quiet and just got on with it, then he would have more time to actually do what he's needing to do, and that is find a cure for this invisibility. So yeah, you've got a certain amount of sympathy for him, but then the way that he treats other people kind of goes against that. So you're kind of mixed. You're never for him all the time, and you're never against him either. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently this film has the highest body count of all the Universal monsters, standing at 123.
Yeah,
so
that would be the train. Yeah.
Yes, apparently he is the most prolific killer in all the monsters. But I think you're right. I think he's not, like, when we first meet him, he seems quite obviously mysterious. You know, literally he walks into a bar and everyone stops and he's asking for a room. But he seems quite impatient and like quite rude maybe to the bar staff. But then obviously, as you say, when you realise what's happened to him, you kind of understand where he's coming from. Now, I mentioned bar staff. This film has a performance from Una O'Connor, who also pops up in The Bride of Frankenstein, a character actress from Northern Ireland. How does her exaggerated performance here contribute to the film's tone? Because I could do without the entire sequence of her squawking, if I'm being honest.
Well, there's more than one sequence where she's doing that, yes. It's more for comic relief more than anything else, I think. I can understand why they had her there to a certain extent. Apparently she was a favourite of James Whale. He really liked her. He liked her comedic acting more than anything else. Yes, it is pretty much over the top, and it could have been toned down or maybe a couple of bits cut out. It was unnecessary. Yes, she's a bit of a hysterical woman at times, but do we need to see that 4 times? Probably not.
No. I'm firmly in the no camp of this as well. It is god awful. And then, as I say, we've got quite a lot of what I would call stereotypes for this film, which we have like the sort of mustachioed policeman with the truncheon truncheon. We have Gloria Stewart's, doting girlfriend left at home. We have Henry Travers' sort of gentle scientist. Did that detract from your viewing, just feeling how relatively two-dimensional these characters all were?
No, it came across more as being a pattern. Now that we are into our third film in the series, it's definitely following a pattern in terms of the locals, the officials, the love interest, the scientists. They could have been transported into any of the films, really, because the film takes place in basically an unknown location. It doesn't really go into
it never says.
It never really says where it's actually set, and you can't really judge by the accents of the cast, as with the previous films, because you're getting a real mix of like sort of English, and like you say, there's an Irish actor in the menu. I couldn't have told you she was Irish, but you've got a few Americans in there as well, so you don't really know where it's at, and they don't really point out anything that would indicate where it's at. I think that kind of goes to the whole sort of fairy tale otherworldliness of it as well, that it doesn't matter where it's from, it's just somewhere, it happens somewhere, and it's all sort of village based and stuff as well. So yes, but somehow they managed to get like 100,000 people searching for him at one point. You say, where the fuck did they all come from? So yes,
sorry.
It doesn't detract from the film in any way, having these sort of set characters. Yes, they are a little two-dimensional, but you've got to remember the film is an hour and 15 minutes long, so it doesn't really have time or the inclination to develop these characters. They are there for plot reasons alone, so you don't, and because we've seen a couple of them, we don't expect them to be developed in any way. You may get the odd piece where they are developed slightly, but then it's just kind of dropped from there as well. It's unnecessary. They don't actually need it. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, to be perfectly honest. I thought that it was necessary to have so many people involved, but they did it in such a way that it's just something that they just have to do. So yeah, I don't think it was a bad thing, to be perfectly honest. What about you? You obviously thoughts on it?
I think you can see where Hammer takes a lot of their inspiration from when you watch these films sort of back to back. I think in this case, I just struggle with the O'Connor character. That's really it. But I think that, as you say, because it's so short, it's actually like an hour and 15 minutes. It's quite all right to have these characters because you know that they're there to do like a specific job, i.e. the policeman is there to lead the manhunt, the newspaper man is there to carry the story about him. Like it's fine, it absolutely works. And also we need to remember this is still early cinema going days as well. So having these sort of stock characters from theatre, which we've said obviously is something that happens quite a lot in these films, is something that readers and theatre goers would be familiar with. And so just having that familiarity where it's easy to follow a story, because as I say, you know what the policeman's there to do. The barman should be sort of wiping a mug with his Cockney wife or whatever accent she was doing. All of that feels familiar and comfortable, which I think is what sort of early cinema was going for, specifically in these films. But I mentioned that it's early cinema. I think this is a film that is really ahead of its time in terms of the story. And obviously that comes from the H.G. Wells novel. And it sort of acts like a moral, like a fable. This might be the 1930s, but we're talking about, ambition and corruption and power and technology. It all feels so relevant given that they were all talking about AI, etc. at the moment. And that's what struck me quite strongly about this film, is that although it's been made just shy of 100 years ago, the themes are sort of still really current and still really topical.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, they're universal themes. It's like, one, why would you want to do this in the first place? And two, what are the uses of it? And three, is it safe? Have you thought about what you're actually doing here? And by developing this technique and this technology, I like the way that it was science-based rather than supernatural-based. It was, and that fitted in with obviously Frankenstein as well. That's all science. Is the basis.
And I love a lab. Yeah.
Yeah. And Dracula is supernatural based, so it's slightly different, and it's obviously based on the novel by H.G. Wells as well. So it's got that whole science fiction element to it, which science fiction for me is never that far away from where we are actually at. And that was something like at the time, X-rays had only been about for 2 years when this film came out. So it was very much the public conscious that you could see into a person's body, you could see the bones, you could get through the flesh and all that. So it was sort of an extension to that. And I know that the book was written maybe 35 years before that. But it's these sort of things, as we progress as a society and technology changes, then people get caught up in all this, and stories reflect the next stage, whatever that is. But yeah, it's very, very relevant to where we're at now, because the same question would be asked: why would you want to do this? What are the applications of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about this film as well is the look of the Invisible Man himself. It's so distinctive. We have the bandages, the thick glasses, the wee tufts of hair that stick out from the top of the bandages, and obviously he's put a false nose on as well. Do you think that still works for like a contemporary audience? And do you think it's influenced a lot of the way that we see like Invisible Man characters when they've been used throughout cinema?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because that fitted in very well with how someone would disguise themselves at the time. They would use bandages. They wouldn't use prosthetics or anything like that, because that wasn't right. You know, you wouldn't use. Well, we'll talk about it later on in Hollow Man. But when you've watched things like the Invisible Man TV show, the David McCallum one, he puts on a full mask and with hair as well, so that he looks like a normal person, and therefore they can take it from there. So yes, and it's a callback to the likes of The Mummy, because they're wrapped in bandages, but it's also a stepping stone into more sort of modern tellings of it as well. And everything about it makes perfect sense. The way that he has bandages all around his face and all around his neck, because that's exposed areas. Everything else he can cover up with gloves, clothes, shoes, etc. But your face, you know, is going to be there. So you can write off by saying you had a terrible accident. And yes, he would have to have a nose. He would have to have something protecting his nose at all times, because otherwise he would just have a bandage wrapped around his nose and he wouldn't be able to breathe properly through his nose. So, you know, it's practical at the same time. And the glasses, the dark glasses thing, it doesn't really get explained in this film, but it gets explained in Hollow Man, which we will talk about, and we can discuss it then, why he needs to wear dark glasses. One is the fact that you can't see anything anyway. There's no, you know, you wouldn't see his eyes anyway, but there's a whole other reason behind that, and we can go on to that. And I didn't think about that at the time, why. Obviously, it was more of a disguise thing, but yes, works particularly well. So, and it's iconic, isn't it? You wouldn't have seen that before, but it's been done so many times since then that that kind of image has been used, especially with the bandages and all that. So yes, it's pretty much sort of genius level, the way that they've put it together. And obviously it works because it's been used so many times before. And if you saw a poster with that character on it, but you didn't see like the title, The Invisible Man, you would say, that's the Invisible Man.
Yeah. And he's such a dapper dresser as well. Like, see the scenes where he's got like the smoking jacket and the cravat, and I'm like, what a cool guy. Like, he just looks like he'd be good for branding a cigarette. So I think the dress or the costume that he wears obviously is befitting his social status in this imaginary world. He's obviously a well-respected scientist. He's obviously quite well-to-do, middle class, and the clothes reflect that. But I just think it adds to who he is as a character, as this kind of debonair guy. And you kind of want to know for the whole film, well, what did he look like when he was a person? Because he's obviously so well-dressed. But about 25 minutes in, we get the reveal of his invisibility with this gloriously maniacal laugh that goes with it. Yeah. What did you think of that as a reveal? Because it happens quite quickly into the film.
Yeah, it was a real surprise, because up until that point it was very measured and it was polished, and he was restrained in a certain way that a gentleman would be. But then when you hear this laugh and you think, okay, there's something else going on. Yeah, that is not normal.
Yeah.
And it is like you've seen things like that before with just madness takes over, and that's what you get from it. Apparently, the performance influenced Mark Hamill when he was doing the Joker for the animated Batman cartoons, and you can really see it, especially with the laughter element of it. It just, you kind of go, that makes so much sense that was there. But yeah, it's incredibly well done, and it's completely out of nowhere. You don't expect it. And because you can't see the guy, because you can't see his face, you can't see him laughing. So it just does come from nothing. And yeah, well, it's kind of scary, I thought, as well, because it's not natural.
It's quite disorientating, and I think that obviously his laugh is so rich as well, which just, you know, goes hand in hand with his voice. From there, we get an invisible force strangling a policeman, knocking over furniture, moving pint glasses along the bar, stealing a bike, and tipping over a pram, which is all good fun. And actually, I think the special effects really hold up, despite the fact that they're nearly 90 years old. Would you agree, or do you think, oh, that's a string, or that's, you know, how do you feel when you're watching that?
You don't see the joins in it when they're doing the special effects. And yes, a lot of them are practical effects, like the footsteps in the snow were just dropping blocks just from out of camera shot in order to do it. But it works well. It works in the way that it's supposed to do it. And like you say, with that sequence you talked about, with the bicycle going along on itself, and then it crashes over. And then you get that cruel one, like he didn't need to push the pram over with a baby inside it. You're kind of thinking, right, this is kind of taking his psychosis to a next level, because he's not just like having a joke and a laugh at their expense and, like, you know, touching people's noses and all that. He is actually being violent towards people, and it ramps up from there as well. Like you say, there are deaths in this.
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the effects are great. I think one of my favourites is the wee smoking cigarette when he's sitting again in his smoking jacket, and he does the whole, we'll begin with a reign of terror, maybe a murder or two. Like, I love that whole sequence. And for some reason, I always laugh at the wee cigarette, not in a, oh, that's terrible way. There's just something about it that's so flamboyant about the way that he moves and he flicks it. I just think, this is brilliant. This is so clever.
I was reading a wee bit about the effects and how they managed to do them, because they look really good. For a film that was made in 1933, especially the invisibility effects, when you see him taking off bandages, when you see it with firsthand, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing, the way that they did that, and it's seamless as well. Apparently, there's one scene where he's looking in the mirror in his room, and he starts taking the bandages off. That's 4 different sequences that were shot for that one scene.
Wow.
They filmed him taking the bandages off, they filmed the background, they filmed the background in the mirror, and they filmed him in the mirror doing it all. So it also had to be like totally coordinated, and there was like 20-30 takes that they had to do of all of these to get it right, and so it would all sink in properly. They were like pushing the abilities of the special effects at the time. The guy that did it was just amazing, and he'd like this whole career from there. He was actually poached away from Universal in order to do other special effects, and he got Oscar nominated for his work in these films because the special effects were so good. And I think this is kind of next level special effects compared to Dracula and Frankenstein, because this is, you're seeing it on camera, you're seeing, and you only get a glimpse of it to begin with, because he's eating, and the landlady comes in, and it's just the bottom half, and it's completely invisible, and it works really well. And it's just thinking, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah,
it's incredible. And then, like you say, apparently it was okay. It was easier to do when he was completely invisible and he wasn't wearing any clothes. But when he was partially clothed, that was the problem. Like, he was wearing pajamas, things like that. You know, and you couldn't see his hands, his feet, or his head. And so those were the bits that really worked. And you can tell that they must have put a hell of a lot of effort into that. Far more than they would normally do for the previous films. Yes, there were special effects, but the likes of Frankenstein, it was more to do with the creature, and it was more to do with the lab, that you had lots of effects and things like that, and they would use map paintings and all this sort of stuff. But this is front and center. This is right in, you're seeing a man turning invisible, and it's just incredible. Just can't believe that was something that came from 1933.
Apparently I read that they had Claude Rains, when he was doing like the clothes stuff, he would be masked in black velvet, and he had black velvet gloves, and they would put him against a black velvet backdrop to try and capture obviously the clothes moving by themselves, as it were. And you just think that the ingenuity, as you say, compared to the likes of Dracula, which maybe had like a bat on a string, or which they were still doing in Hammer, by the way, and obviously the Frankenstein, the effect is like the lab itself. And this feels so far ahead of the other two in terms of effects. It's quite remarkable, and I just think that the effects really stand up. And I think that it's funny because when you look back in films now that are maybe only like 5 or 10 years old, and you're like, God, that CGI looks really dated or whatever, whereas this is nearly 100 years old, and it has managed to retain its sense of, like, it looks authentic, it looks completely credible, for what they could achieve at the time. So I think that's quite a feat.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And one thing about this film that we've both mentioned is the runtime. So it's only an hour and 15 minutes long. We do get a couple of bits of exposition where the invisibility premise is sort of explained. But what did you think of the pacing generally? I'm thinking particularly towards the third act, where it does become, 100,000 people with pitchforks are all out looking for him. Do you feel like it was a bit rushed? Do you think there was maybe like 15, 20 minutes that they could have tacked on to the end of it? Or what did you think about the pacing overall?
Pacing was very good. I don't think they would really need to extend the final third of the film really in any way, because at that point, everything is clear, what his intentions are, what the authorities' intentions are, even the love interest and all that. You wouldn't need to expand on any of that. So yeah, it felt kind of right. And because, like we mentioned before about the supporting characters, some of them are a wee bit sort of two-dimensional, then it would feel a bit off if you suddenly started developing them late on just to add a wee bit to it. Yeah, I thought that the runtime was suitable for what we actually got. It didn't need to be any longer, and it might have dragged in certain sequences, because where would you extend it? Would you add more of the people in the inn, for instance? Would you add a wee bit more colour in there?
No more,
yeah, exactly, no. yeah. Would you add more about the other scientists, what they were doing, that kind of thing? Maybe not, but I don't think it was necessary to really extend it in any way, and it just kind of fitted quite nicely. And it was true to the original story as well, for the most part. So you would have been adding more elements in that weren't in the original story, which was quite important because H.G. Wells had the final say on the screenplay. Because I was reading that basically every writer in the Universal Studios had a go at this at one time or another, and there was all sorts of versions, including one that was set on Mars, which,
It sounds like a Fast and Furious sequel.
Nice.
Oh dear, I didn't know that though. That's really interesting, and it's interesting obviously because likes of your Dracula, likes of your Frankenstein are not particularly close to, they're more based on stage plays as to the novels themselves, but interesting obviously that this one is slightly more close to the source material. No, to be honest with you, I would just like to see a tiny bit more hijinks. I love the scene where he steals the tray of money from the Lloyd's Bank, which does make me think it's set in England.
Yeah, I've had a wee look here. Yeah, it seems to be set reasonably close to London.
Right. So, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Just more hijinks would have been lovely. As I say, I particularly love the scene with the little floating cigarette. I find that just genuinely hysterical. one of the things that the film has, I'm going to say accused of, that's not right, but it's a lot of people think it's more of a sort of mad scientist tale or a dark comedy rather than a monster movie. So do you think it does fit into the Universal monsters? Is it just been labelled this because it was out at the same time? Or like, what is it about it do you think makes it a monster movie specifically?
It's because of the way that the main character of Griffin changes. He becomes more monstrous from about the halfway part. As soon as he goes in and derails a train, you know that this is not a nice guy. So yes, he has become a monster through his actions, and he's not fully thought through the consequences of taking this drug and making him invisible. So yes, it fits in very well with the sort of Universal Monsters box set, more than there was other films that were made around about the time, and they were horror films and things like that, and they don't fit in at all. So that's why they're not there. And the likes of James Whale was involved in some of these films as well. But yes, I mean, the whole thing about a monster movie is you've got a main character who transforms in some way. And Dracula, yes, he was the Count, but there he was the vampire and then the bat. And obviously the creature in Frankenstein was bits of other people. And then, yeah, and the brain from AB Normal. So in this, yes, it's somebody who's trying to push the boundaries of science and also make a name for himself, because that's what he says, I'm just a lowly chemist. And you think, lowly? But yeah, it didn't. The whole reason behind it was because he wanted to have a future with his fiancée, his girlfriend, and but he felt he was kind of beneath her. He didn't have the status, even though he was very, like you say, he's very well dressed and very well presented and all that. But yeah, so it's a sort of classic tale, and that fits in really nicely with the whole monsters thing. It's people trying to do the right thing, but it kind of just doesn't work out that way at all.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, yes, there obviously is elements of the mad scientist tale in this, but it's this notion of like a disregard for life or creation that's quite a common theme throughout these films. And that's obviously, that comes about, as you say, when he sort of goes insane as part of his medicated trials into invisibility. And I think at the heart of that, obviously, is his character. And these monster movies very much, as you say, focus on one character and their specific transformation. So yes, obviously it does have these other elements of other genres, as the novel itself has. It's a science fiction novel, but I think it definitely does fit into the sort of pantheon of monster movies really, really well.
Definitely.
And we also have, this is 3 for 3 on James Whale. We've obviously seen Dracula and Frankenstein. Do you think that you can see a sort of evolution of him as a director? Do you think this is the best out of the 3 we've seen so far from him? What do you think about his direction generally in The Invisible Man?
I think he has an awful lot of control by the third film. He is obviously a very good director. I think he was an actor originally as well, so he knows how to work with actors and get the best performances from them. And obviously there's been stories about sort of back and forth with him and Karloff, for instance, about who was actually taking credit for these type of films, you know, who was the sort of driving force behind it. And James Whale apparently was a wee bit envious of the fame of Karloff. So that may have been one reason why he would bring in somebody like Claude Rains, because he can control him and work with him a lot easier without sort of major egos and stuff. And his storytelling has improved throughout the 3 films. The first film is very short and there's not very much story to it at all. But by the third one, and like you say, this is down to the fact that they're not based on pre-existing plays. This is based on the novel itself, so it's slightly different. He's expanding his range, and he's getting, on the whole, I know there's maybe one performance in there that you really don't like, but for the main characters, he's getting really good performances out of them. They're subtle performances rather than being over the top scientists and things like that. Some of the secondary characters, yes, they are very stagey.
Yeah,
you can get it, but they're not going to spend an awful lot of time redoing that for an element that may only last like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. They're going to concentrate on the main characters and make sure that they're the ones that shine more than the the background characters. And obviously there's money involved here as well. There's a lot. Obviously, the budget for this must have been more because of all the reshoots for the special effects and the way that things. Like, for instance, like I talked how they were doing like 20 takes of certain scenes in order to get it right, so it was all seamless. Whereas in Dracula, there's a scene with one of the maidens walking backwards and nearly banging into somebody else, but they kept that in because it's only a wee minor thing. So they obviously didn't need to reshoot, and it costs more money and everything. So yeah, you can definitely see that his confidence is like sort of sky high at this point. He knows exactly what he's doing. And one of the reasons behind him actually doing this film was to avoid doing The Bride of Frankenstein directly after Frankenstein as well. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to sort of expand a wee bit rather than being known exclusively as the Frankenstein director, or doing it again and again. So you can kind of get sort of pigeonholed in that way. So you can see, yes, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was really good. What about you?
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. I think the confidence is unbelievable because the special effects in particular must have been such a mammoth task to think out and to plan and to create, and then obviously to bring on to screen as well. Because although cinema was new, you have to remember things like vaudeville and magic acts were very much well established within the leisure sector, within American culture in particular, and so seeing these tricks of the eye would not have been new. So they did have to look good for the time, and obviously they still look good now. So I think that you can see that he's obviously grown in strength and obviously retains the essence of the novel. He gets really good performances out of the lead characters, and I think just doing something slightly different, because although, as we said, like Frankenstein is created in a lab and Dracula obviously is the supernatural, this feels somehow like more like clean and contemporary, because there's maybe not the big dramatic transformation scene with a bolt of lightning, or he doesn't fly away into a bat. It feels quite, I don't want to say scientific, but do you know what I mean? There's something about it that just feels a little bit less sort of wrapped up in a sort of the imaginary or a fairy tale. It feels quite realistic. So I think it's a really good run. I mean, if I was James Whale, I'd be annoyed because in all these films you've got Carl Lammle Presents at the top and James Whale's like a wee forgotten footnote at the bottom. You simply wouldn't have that now in terms of like a big director or whatever, like just would not allow somebody else's name to be much bigger above the film. If I was Lee Cronin, I'd be taking my name off the Mummy. But it's interesting how low down the pecking order on the poster James Whale is for all of these films, which obviously is just a product of the studio system at the time. But yeah, do you have a particularly favourite scene in this film, one that kind of stands out that you're always going to go back to?
I actually really liked the initial scene where he turns up at the inn, because it's like a Western, because when he comes in, everybody stops what they're doing, and before that it's all just chaotic. There's people playing darts, there's a guy playing the piano, but he's not playing the piano. It's one of these coin operated pianos, and he turns around and he takes a bow and everything, and it sets up the slightly more comedic elements of it, and then you get this the dramatic, the guy coming in with the bandages, and it just completely silences the whole place, and you see there's a shot of basically all of the extras all together just looking at him as if they've all come over here, look at this kind of. I just love that. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. It's such a good way to introduce his character as being something unusual and out there, and people don't know what to do with it. So that immediately sets the tone for the rest of the film, and I just think it's wonderful without even seeing any effects or anything like that. It's just great. Loved it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Apart from the little floating cigarette, which is honestly, I just think it's so class. I would watch that scene day in, day out. I love the introduction to the character. I think if you're going to bring in a character like that, that's the way to do it. It's literally to have all of the chaos stop. And I will say there is one moment where the O'Connor squawking is merited, and it is, as you've mentioned, when he's having his dinner and it's just the bottom half of his face, and she goes up to bring him mustard, and she opens the door and obviously realizes there's something like basically half of his face is missing, so she sort of screams and runs away. It feels like a genuine reaction. If you did see someone who half their face was missing, you would scream and run away. So I will let her off with that particular squawk. Otherwise, I could do without. One of the things, and I think this links us quite nicely onto Hollow Man before we go to talk about that, is I mentioned at the start of the episode that we have a review and a chat about Lee Whannell's Invisible Man, which obviously takes the story off in a completely different direction. And it did get me thinking, if that particular version weren't released and we were talking about a version of the Invisible Man that was to be released today, I definitely think that Griffin's descent into madness would be interpreted really differently, and the whole notions of like abuse of power and the use of science would be completely reinterpreted. That's what makes this film not feel dated at all. Like, this film could be entirely remade now and it would still be so relevant. And I think that's where the Lee Whannell version in particular gets it right. It's this notion of this abuse of power, which is interesting because I don't think Griffin is necessarily a bad character or has bad intentions. It's just that he becomes that way. Whereas I think in a contemporary imagining, it would just be that the person was bad and they were using it for bad intentions as well. And I think that's the distinction between the films.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. It would be interpreted slightly differently the way they would do it in a modern, because they would have to bring in some elements that you wouldn't have in that film. Like you say, the film stands up because it feels very contemporary, but that's only because of the sort of situation that we have been in over the last,
forever
50, 60 years. Yeah. Just with the way that technology changes and the way that technology is used to introduce something like the World Wide Web. Well, that's great. Everybody can talk to each other. So what are we going to do? Well, we'll have a lot of porn. And then we'll have a whole area that you can't get to unless you've got special access to it, and bad people, and you want to buy guns and drugs. So yeah. So, and that's been done time and time again. So yes, it's these sort of elements would have been added to it. There would have been more emphasis on the descent into madness as well, rather than it just being, he's been invisible for a while and he's a bit crazy. Yeah. Whereas you would see more of that, I think, if they did a newer version of it as well. And I don't think you would be as impressed by the special effects, because we've seen so many things that can be done now with special effects, and you just go, yeah, it's okay, it's fine. Whereas an audience in 1933 would have been completely blown away by that. Even later, I was still very impressed by it, but don't think a film now would have the same sort of effect on an audience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they'd be aiming for more of a sort of cultural impact as opposed to a visual sort of impact, which makes sense. So is there anything else you'd like to add about 1933's The Invisible Man before we move on to Paul Verhoeven's Hollow Man?
No. Just think it's a great film, and it's an hour and a quarter that is very well spent. Let's face it.
Just joy. Yeah, I'd highly recommend, if you've not got the box set already, just trying to seek this film out. So we are talking about moving forward rather to the year 2000 and Paul Verhoeven's entry into the monster canon with Hollow Man. The film follows an arrogant and ambitious scientist as he experiments with invisibility serums on animals. Desperate to trial it on humans, he volunteers to be the guinea pig in a secret operation in order to get him to turn invisible. The government don't know that he's doing this. But as you can imagine, things go disastrously wrong, and much like Whale's film, chaos and violence ensue. The film stars Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Shue, Josh Brolin, Kim Dickens, Joey Slotnick and Mary Randall, to name but a few. So, the big question: how does Kevin Bacon's performance, both physical and vocal, stack up to create the character of Sebastian versus Claude Rains' Jack Griffin?
Yeah, this is an entirely different beast here, isn't it? Because initially you see the Kevin Bacon character. He is on screen as a scientist. And like we briefly mentioned there, it sets it up that he's not a particularly nice guy to begin with. He does have a distinctive voice. Kevin Bacon's voice is quite distinctive. You could pick that out of a lineup quite easily. So you have that, but you get a sense of what the character is actually like right from the start, and you don't particularly like him in any way. And the arrogance shines through right from the very start when he's doing his computer models and he's working away at it. And you can tell that he's easily distracted because he's got a sign up in the ceiling saying you should be working. So he's obviously a brilliant scientist, but he also has a bit of an ego about him as well, which would fit quite nicely in with the Universal Monsters, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell that he's a bellend. He's set up as this sort of like bad boy of science. He's got a fast car, a leather jacket, a poor diet, and a messy love life. And he spies on the neighbour across the road when she's getting changed. Like, and I think the thing that this film touches on that maybe The Invisible Man doesn't touch on is this notion of like playing God. He definitely thinks of himself as a god amongst scientists, never mind amongst people he is seen to be the best in the lab, etc. I love early 2000s computer graphics where they do like the clicky clicky click and then everything like materializes on screen. So that introduction to the character is quite interesting. What I would say is most distinctive about Kevin Bacon's actually a physical feature is his nose. Like he has a very distinct shaped nose. So I was wondering how his physical performance would sort of impact when you can't see his face, but obviously they get around that problem by covering him in latex, which we'll chat about later. But yeah, it definitely went to more lengths to show you who he was as a person before he became invisible, and obviously the arrogance in that he thinks he knows better than the government, who tell him essentially not to do the experiment on himself. I don't know how complex you would say the character was, or if you thought he was like, as I say, your typical sort of genre trope, sort of bad boy, kind of arrogant male character of the early 2000s, which is very prominent, obviously, of that era. Did you think he was quite well fleshed out as a character, or did the introduction not do enough for you?
The introduction did more than enough. It showed exactly what he was. I didn't think they really needed to develop it any further because you were not going to have any sympathies with this character right from the start because of basically his lecherous nature more than anything else. And I know it's a film of its time and everything, but going back and watching it and thinking, jings.
This is
okay, yeah.
And we'll definitely touch on that because this is not a film that has aged well at all, quite frankly.
No.
But I mentioned obviously quite a long list of supporting cast there. I've completely forgotten Josh Brolin was in this film, if I'm being honest with you. What did you think of their roles, particularly Elizabeth Shue and Josh Brolin, because they are sort of foregrounded more than the others?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Elizabeth Shue's name appears before Kevin Bacon's. I
saw that,
Yeah. I think she was the bigger star at the time, based on her previous performances. So that was interesting that she got sort of top billing. You're obviously meant to have more sympathy for especially the Josh Brolin character and Elizabeth Shue character because they are together as well, and she had previously had a history, Kevin Bacon's character. So I liked the way that they were the sort of counterpoint. They were the rational, normal scientists. They were doing it for the reasons that, for science reasons rather than for like military applications, which I don't get. I'll just say this now. I don't get the whole idea of using this as a military application because you'd be sending naked people into battle without any guns unless you can invisibilize guns.
I never even thought about that. Actually, it's not because you could have an invisible person driving a tank, but the tank would still be here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yes, if you look at it too closely, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in why they're actually doing it. But sometimes they're just doing these things because they can. It's the future of science. You do something and then you develop the application of it later on, like the famous one, and obviously it's become quite relevant again, is like the non-stick frying pans, and that came from technology that was used in the initial space race. Although I read a wee reader's comment in Viz saying why did they develop non-stick frying pans for the space? Because surely the sausages would just have floated away. But there you go. Yeah, so it was quite a long cast, and that's necessary if you're having this sort of science-based things, and it's like almost like a wee community, and they've obviously worked together for a number of years. And Kevin Bacon's character, he's definitely in charge, but there is a dynamic that goes on there between the whole team, and they're all involved in it, and they all have their own wee pockets as well, because there's the computer geeks that sit up in the gallery and they do all that sort of stuff, and there's the people actually in the lab area, and one of them monitors sort of vitals, another one administers the medicine and all this kind of thing. So yes, it was quite a nice wee ensemble. But when you have a wee ensemble like that, you think, right, when things go sideways, you're going to have certain people from that ensemble being dispatched, and rather, you know, so that's kind of expected. Even for a film of the time, it was expected then. So it was kind of like foreshadowing the fact that something was going to go wrong even before you actually get it, because you got a wee glimpse of each person and each character and how they actually were involved, and you thought, yeah, okay, right, so I've had enough to kind of guess what the order's going to be here more than anything else. Yeah.
Yes. I would say that I felt that their chemistry, like the wider group chemistry, felt a bit forced at times, and I wasn't sure if that was like a dialogue or a performance thing. I did also notice that all the women in the lab have short hair because science, but they're also wearing crop tops because it's Paul Verhoeven and it's the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So it was like a strange kind of balance there as well. But as I say, I you're totally right. You could kind of work out the order in which they were going to be sort of picked off later on in the film. So as we talked about, obviously this film hasn't aged well, and it is quite pervy to say the least. It leans into this notion of like voyeurism, surveillance, and quite frankly violation of personal space. Do you think it actually critiques these themes rather, or is that there to titillate the audience? Because I just think this has aged so horribly in terms of Kevin Bacon's character and obviously the abuse of power that he partakes in once he becomes invisible.
Oh, it definitely has not aged well at all, and I was actually quite shocked when I watched it. I sent you a message afterwards saying I didn't remember it being quite so rapey as it turned out to be. And the problem with it really is that it tries to make it sexy and alluring when he's doing this. Like there's a sequence where he goes over to the woman that he's been watching across the hall, and it's made to be sort of, I mean, she's like, was she in the bath or the shower or something like that, and then she was wearing just like a small robe and things like this, and you're just like, really, you know? So it's making almost like rape, normalizing it a bit and saying, you know, well, it's all kind of sexy here, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And then they do it again where one of the female characters is in the changing room and she's sitting down and she doesn't know whether he's there or not and things like that. And there's one of the other female characters, she's asleep, and it starts like on.
That's the Elizabeth Shue character.
Yeah, that happens twice. It happens to the.
Oh, it happens to the Kim Dickens character initially.
Yes.
When she's in the chair. Yeah.
Yes, but she is. Yeah, the Elizabeth Shue character has a dream about it all as well, and it's very voyeuristic, and it's not commenting on it in any way. It's just saying, hey, look at this, you know. What do you think about this? And it does not work in any way whatsoever.
No, it definitely plays into this notion of like, do you know how if you were to say to someone, a man, if you were made invisible for the day, what would be the first thing you would do? And a lot of people would give rather unsavory answers, quite honestly, because it's like the worst person you know just got the power to become even more unbearable. And I think that it definitely doesn't offer any notion of like he should get his comeuppance. As you say, it's like, you know, he gets a girl's boob out on a chair and it's meant to be kind of like sexy. Another scientist, these are supposed to be brilliant minds, and it's like, well, she's on the toilet and you don't know if he's there or not. And the whole dream sequence with Elizabeth Shue as well is just god awful. Like, I think it really is distasteful to watch that back now and go like, why was this ever okay? And the interesting thing about the the sexual assault sequence, because I will call it that, because it is
intimated
that he rapes her, as he stands at the window. Which, by the way, can everyone in this film buy some fucking blinds and put them down if you're gonna, But he stands at his window and goes, "Don't do it, don't do it." And then the next thing, you're following him because you've got that kind of like over the shoulder sort of camera shot as he moves into her apartment. And it's kind of done like almost playfully to start. Like he pulls up bits of her hair while she's blow drying it as well.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a full-on sexual assault and you see her screaming. And I'm like, what is this adding to this story? Like, it's just so distressing to see, especially because, like, it's not past any sort of like critique on it. It's not saying like you should never do this or whatever. It's just there. I don't know. It's just there, and I feel like it just doesn't. It doesn't add anything to the film for sure. But what I will say is that the film, perhaps, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt in this sense, plays into that sort of turn of the millennium anxiety around technology and privacy and science, because obviously you had like the big millennium bug countdown as well, and people were worried that the internet was somehow going to be like in their homes and they were going to have no control over what like their computer. Remember, people used to put like stickers over their webcams and stuff because they were worried about like their computer spying on them. So I will say that it perhaps passes commentary on that, but not in a way that could be held up today and says,
no,
oh, this is actually quite interesting. It's really quite grotty watching it back.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The only thing I can think of why they would do that would be to sort of chart his descent into insanity and madness and rage and everything. But even then, it could be done without taking somebody's clothes off or having a, being a rape scene. Yeah, it was unnecessary. It was, and I know a lot of films around about that time, it wasn't a complete film without some sort of a sex scene in it, some way. Yeah. But yes, it doesn't excuse it in any way. I don't think it works in that particular way at all. It wasn't needed, definitely not. No. And I was really surprised. I'd seen it at the time, and when I watched it again, I thought, "Fuck's sake."
Yeah, it's really, because I think that his transformation, as we've already said, it's not like it's a psychological unraveling in the way that you kind of feel about the Claude Rains character. It's definitely just an inevitable consequence of somebody who, like, because when he first talks to the veterinarian at the start of the film, he says, "You're not God, I am." So he's had this unchecked ego the entire time. So I don't feel like you ever feel any sympathy or you're ever shocked that this is the person that he would become. You're like, no, this makes sense. This guy has been an arse from day one, sort of thing.
Yep, totally. Yeah, there's no redeeming qualities about him at all. He's a dick. He's a very clever guy, and that's why they tolerate him, because he's a brilliant scientist. But yes, he's just a complete dick. Yeah.
One thing that I did particularly enjoy about this film is the lab setup. I am really partial to early 2000s Chrome. Like, I love when you see that in films, and I love all the, like, as I said, the wee clicky clack of the machines and everything, like, sort of line up. However, I will say that it does kind of date the film. It feels very early 2000s because the whole institution doesn't really feel like credible. What did you think about watching that back?
Oh, I love that sort of thing. I think it's great to see all the, well, it's nice to see all the sort of older technology as well, and the fact that it's like flip phones and all that they had, all this kind of thing. But yeah, the whole lab, it's massive, and they've got like lots of chrome and lots of like wires and all sorts of stuff. And it didn't seem very sanitary for some reason, because it's like when they were making them invisible for the first time, they just strap them down, and you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, maybe there'd be a wee bit more, lab. It would be a wee bit more medical than it actually was. But these things work really well. It grounds it in a certain way. You know that it's definitely science-based then, and you don't need to have long explanations about how it all works and things like that. You just accept the top scientists, and this is where they work. And the whole fact that they had that, like I mentioned before, the gallery that looked down on it, didn't need that in any way. Why would they have this? You go up to it as if it's like, it's a stage, they're on in this. They're watching them from the gods and things like that. It's just, yeah. But yeah, I can't really complain about stuff like that. It looks really nice, and obviously put a lot of thought into how it all supposed to be set up and everything. So yeah, that's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, the big luminous coloured serum and the giant needle. I kind of love stuff like that because it's just so ridiculous as well that you go along with it, don't you? You're like, yeah, it's science stuff. This will work.
Yeah, but it's the whole process that they have to go through because they have the material that's actually in the vial, and then it gets irradiated, but they have to get tongs in order to get it out and then put it onto the gun that's injected. You know, and you're thinking, is that probably the most efficient way of doing that? I don't know.
I love how we're questioning the scientific process here, but like it dates it in a nice way. I think like there's something about it that feels very sort of, as I say, very early 2000s. One thing that dates it perhaps not in a good way is the CGI effects of, first of all, we see it with the gorilla, where the gorilla goes from being invisible to like blood and veins, capillaries, bones, and then becomes flesh again. And obviously with Kevin Bacon, we see his character disintegrate. What did you think of those transformations, and do you think those special effects still hold up?
Yeah, it was I thought it was a slightly weird way to do the whole invisibility, as in doing it in sections, like it goes from the outside in. I'm thinking here as a scientist and saying, well, would it really happen that way? You know, the fact that so it did look a bit weird, but they were making the most of the fact that you were able to dig into the anatomy of someone and see it all. I did kind of like that. I liked the idea of when they injected it at first, especially when they were trying to bring them back, and you'd see the injection spreading.
Yeah, that was cool.
I did like that, but yes, there was elements in it where people were acting against something that wasn't there on the table, and that felt a wee bit off. It didn't feel as natural as the 1933 film for some reason. I don't know if it was just the way that they actually shot it or whatever, but yes, it didn't feel the same. Having said that, some of the effects later on when you see him as an invisible character, I thought were good, especially when he's wearing the latex mask and stuff like that. But yes, it wasn't as good. It's dated. It wouldn't be done that way now. It would be done a lot more slicker now, I think, and it would feel more natural. And I mean, you've got to remember this film is 26 years old, so it's not too bad for the time. It would have looked groundbreaking at the time. It definitely would have. It would have been very much up there. But when you're looking at some of the sort of films that came before, I mean, for instance, The Matrix came out the year before this, and the effects in The Matrix are unbelievable, whereas this seems like a wee step down from there. And I think that's possibly got to do with the money more than anything else, budgets. But yeah, so I take it you didn't enjoy the gorilla effect.
I like, as you said, I like the injection spreading throughout the body, but some of it felt like, do you know how you used to get those, like, is it Usborne science textbooks with the big head with all the skin scraped off, and it was like the big eyeballs and stuff like that? It felt like a school textbook. It didn't really feel like a horrific experiment. And then, as you say, some of the acting with Against Nothing didn't quite work for me, so that didn't really age it particularly well, alongside some of the themes. But I get the impression that they were sort of doing the best with the tech that they had at that time. That sounds really patronising. I don't mean it that way. I just think that
I know what you mean.
The way that it has. So you mentioned there the latex mask. Obviously, the experiment to bring Kevin Bacon's character back to life goes horribly wrong. But instead of bandages and sunglasses, they decided to give him a rather pink latex coating. What did you think of the look of this character then?
It propelled it right into the horror right away when you see that, because when you see that, and it was really rough as well, because when they cut out the eyes and they put the slit in the mouth, and I don't think they actually did anything with the nose. I think they kept that close. It was just must have been breathing out his mouth all the time. When they did that, you're right in the realms of horror, because the latex goes on nice and smooth, but then it's all rumpled and everything at the back. So it looks as if he's like some sort of a burn victim as well. And obviously he's wearing the sunglasses all the time because he has transparent eyelids.
Yeah.
And therefore he will see everything. And you don't think about that, the fact that when you go to sleep, you close your eyes. And therefore you can't, he's never able to do that. So therefore it's always darkened rooms and he has to wear sunglasses as well. So that's all part of the look. So it looked really freaky. And it looked like a horror character at that point. It was like halfway towards a sort of like Freddy Krueger with the sort of melted face kind of idea, a wee bit. But yeah, so yes, it was transformation in that he was becoming more unhinged, but he looked unhinged at the same time. He didn't look normal. He didn't look like a human being. But yes, I like the idea of that, because that's what they would do. That's now you would have a latex mask. You wouldn't have bandages because it's far easier to get on and off, and probably more hygienic as well, I would imagine as well.
Yeah, I felt it brought it up to date in that sense, and that the technology allowed them to have that. But you're right, it definitely added more of a horror element to it, particularly when he was just walking around and you could see obviously the hollows of his eyes because he's a hollow man. But that was really scary to me because I don't, and I've always said this, I don't like it when they do eye stuff in horror films. I don't like eyes that are blacked out. I don't like close-ups of stuff going near eyes. And so the fact that he had none whatsoever was really quite disconcerting. I thought, oh my God, because although he's talking and he's moving around, you can't actually communicate with him because you can't see anything that's going on. Like, it's just a face. So I did find that quite frightening in that sense. And I guess that sort of leans into the film is a little bit of sci-fi. It is a monster movie. I suppose you could kind of call it horror or horror adjacent as well. It leans into that sort of element.
A wee bit. Yeah, it's more a thriller than a horror, I would say. Yeah, it's got slight elements of that, but no, I mean, if the character wasn't invisible and it was just a mad scientist, it would be a thriller.
No, that's completely fair. What did you think of the direction? Paul Verhoeven is obviously known for being a bit of a provocateur. Did you think that Hollow Man continued this tradition, or do you think it's an unusually sort of straightforward film for him?
It is more straightforward for him rather than being... It was provocative for the sake of it, with these elements, the sex elements and stuff. And he has said that it was the first of his Hollywood films that he thought that another 20 directors could have made, whereas the previous ones that he made, he was saying nobody else in Hollywood could have made this film like Basic Instinct. No one could have made the film that he made. But with Hollow Man, basically anybody could have done it. It wasn't necessary to be him. And I think he was kind of put off from the system at that point, just because he thought, well, I'm not doing anything unique. It's really just falling into the same sort of category. I mean, it was a well-made film. It was pacey. Introduced all the main characters and the main themes of it quite early on, so you could get on with the whole sort of thriller/horror element of it. So yes, it worked in that respect, but it didn't really do anything surprising from the point of direction, I don't think. It was nice to look at in certain points, but yeah.
I would completely agree with that, especially, like, I mean, interesting that he said that anyone else could have directed this, because I definitely felt that as well. Although there obviously was meant to be some intended sexy bits, it wasn't like a show. I can't believe I'm using this as an example. It wasn't like a Showgirls or anything like that where you're like, oh, that's a Paul Verhoeven film, that's fucking mental. I can't believe that's the benchmark. But do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like there was anything about it that felt specifically his. So interesting that he sort of acknowledged that as well. And it's easy to see, though, how a lot of directors, sort of European or otherwise, could fall into this trap where obviously I don't want to say it's an easy gig because directing isn't, but do you know what I mean? Like, you're making this sort of like relatively generic product, this Hollywood film, and then you could get offered 20 more of those and you could do them and it would be fine and you would probably make money, but it's obviously not the type of film that he wants to make. So fair play to him for acknowledging that.
Yep. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So the pacing, as you said, I think is really good in this film. It obviously leads towards a big explosive conclusion. What did you think of the final act of this film in comparison to the fate of Claude Rains' character in The Invisible Man?
Yeah, it's very much a Hollywood action film at that point, isn't it? You know, with the scene in a lift shaft and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, it becomes very silly. The lead up to the beginning of that big sort of action finale is good because they're all trapped in the lab and they're trying to figure out where he is, and they're using things like fire extinguishers and stuff like that in the same way that in the Claude Rains film it was like fog and snow and things like that, all the elements, and rain. They did a lot of stuff with rain, obviously, as well. So they used similar elements to try and sort of find out where he was. And I liked that when it started, but then it did get a bit silly because there were, at certain times, Sebastian could have just killed people outright, but no, he had to toy with them and, you know, mess about and throw them against, talk to them and throw them against walls and stuff rather than just killing them outright, which you would think that character would do. And that's where these films fall down, because characters become really stupid. You know, the whole aim that they have is totally blown away by the fact that they're playing. I know this is playing God and all that, and he's playing with his subjects and stuff. But if you've got the first 2/3 of the film where he commits some very atrocious acts, but he dispatches people really quickly. He doesn't mess about with them, but then he toys with them and sort of cat and mouse way. You're thinking, oh, I've seen this so many times before. It doesn't reflect on the character and the way that you've built up this character, so it doesn't work. And then you have big explosion sequences, and I'll just say then you have a false ending as well, and you're like, come on, fuck's sake, man, really? You know?
Oh, that in particular felt cloying for me. I just didn't understand how, like, it seems unreal that all of these scientific minds put together couldn't compete with him. Like, apparently he was so far, you know, advanced in terms of smarts and stuff like that. And I get that he's invisible, but they'd come up with these solutions, like the water sprinklers, the fire extinguishers, that sort of thing. And yet they still ended up in this sort of like bloodbath. And then you have Josh Brolin, who's been stabbed and frozen because they're kept in at -50, and he's running up a jangly ladder in a lift shaft. And you're like, there's no way that you'd be able, like, physically able to do that, because you've just been like frozen alive, but you're also very, very injured. So I agree with you. I think it became completely ridiculous towards the end, and where it might have had my respect up until that point, voyeurism elements aside, it just completely lost me in the last act. I was like, there's no way you'd be sitting down for a 5-minute chat and quite literally playing Marco Polo. You would just get rid of them. That would be it.
Exactly. Yeah. It felt so out of place. But with these sort of action thriller films, and especially during that time, yes, you need a big finale. You need your James Bond moment. You need sets being destroyed and all this sort of stuff. Yes, and made no sense at all. But that's what it is.
I will say though that Sebastian being covered in red paint was quite unsettling. If you thought the latex was bad, he literally looked like a big blood stain. So I thought that was quite good. So I guess, I mean, where do you think this film sort of sits in the pantheon of monster movies that we've talked about? And do you think it's simply just a product of early 2000s filmmaking, or do you think it's actually quite a good monster film?
It's not a particularly good monster film, because we've kind of seen it all before by that point. We've seen it been done, the mad scientist, people going off the rails, and the same idea, like, you know, people getting taken out one by one kind of idea. We've seen that before so many times, and it's kind of old hat even by then. It doesn't work in that respect. The film works in a certain extent as an action film. It is watchable. I definitely watched it all the way through to the end, but I don't think it's a particularly good example of a horror film or a universal monsters type film, unfortunately. And I had high hopes for it because I was one that recommended this, obviously, based on the limited availability of other films.
There's surprisingly a lack of Invisible Man films, which I was quite shocked about.
Yeah, I mean, the next one that I thought of before that was Memoir of an Invisible Man, the Chevy Chase comedy, which was about 15 years before that. And I thought, well, that's problematic in so many levels even before we start watching it. So, So yes, it was an okay film. It could have been a lot better, but it was made for a mainstream audience of the time, and it was made to make money, which it did. It was a successful film. So, as were all of Paul Verhoeven films at that time. So,
yeah, so much so that it got a sequel. Now, I haven't watched this, but you have.
I have, yes.
What does Hollow Man 2 have in store for the casual viewer who may find themselves looking for something to watch on Netflix?
It is completely different to Hollow Man in that there is no real sort of team of scientists. There are a couple of scientists in it, and it's all around the fact that a military operative has been made invisible and they've been unable to bring him back, and he is trying to find the people that are responsible for it in order to try and make him visible again. So it's more a sort of standard action film with the Invisible Man doing things, and it works to a certain extent because you see things like he gets pushed through a window and he bleeds, and you can just see all the blood starting to form on the outside of him and things like that. So it works, and yeah, so there's a couple of wee cool moments in it, and there's like a police detective whose partner gets killed by the Invisible Man, and he has to seek out this scientist and try and protect her. And it's more to do with the sort of military, so it's more of a sort of standard action film. It's not really a horror film either. There are obviously wee bits and pieces in it, and it works okay, but there's a reason it was a straight to DVD film at the time. Again, it's watchable, and it's only about an hour and 40 minutes, so it won't tax you, and you pretty much know what's going to happen. And because there's a couple of people on the run, and rather going on the run, they say, "No, I'm going to stay here and work out the problem." And you say, "Just fucking run away and leave somebody else to deal with the problem." Yeah.
Have none of you seen a movie ever?
Exactly. Yes. But
who is the Invisible Man? Who is the lead?
Oh, it's Christian Slater is the Invisible Man.
Oh. Okay.
Which is actually quite good because he's got a very distinctive voice as well.
And a distinctive look as well. Like his features are quite unique as well. Interesting.
I think this was slightly later in his career, so I think he was accepting some of these roles, and he obviously is doing voice work, whereas he doesn't need to do very much else because he can just have a stand-in doing the other bits and pieces, and he just does the voice for all of it. Whereas Kevin Bacon thought it was going to be like a really easy gig for him. He wouldn't be there most of the time, and he'd just do the voice in sort of post-production. But they found that when all the actors were acting and supposedly with this invisible character, they didn't really know where to look and what to do. So they actually said, "You need to be on set. And by the way, you're wearing this full body green unitard thing. So, you know."
Call time's 5 a.m. See you, Kev.
And he said at the time, it'll be an easy film for me to make. And then he turned around and said it was the most physically demanding movie that he's ever been involved in before and since. And this is a man who danced his way through a factory, and, you know, all sorts. So yes, it's. But the second film's okay. It's worth a watch. See if you've got nothing else to watch. Yeah, fire it on. You won't be disappointed, but you won't. There will be no great revelations here.
Oh, okay. On that note, I might give that a miss, but maybe our listeners will want to seek it out if we haven't put them off by our review of Hollow Man as it stands. So, trigger warning for that. It is definitely significantly more creepy and sinister than the Claude Rains version. But that is everything from us on this episode of the Moviescramble podcast. You can find us on all the usual social channels, including Instagram and Blue Sky, or you can drop us an email, podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. Thank you to everyone who's done so far in order to be part of our new collaboration series. We're very much looking forward to kicking that off and getting some guests on the show. We'd also be delighted if you took the time to give us a star rating on your podcast platform of choice. But just remember, anything less than 5 stars and we send invisible Kevin Bacon round. So until the next episode, it is bye from me. Bye.
Bye.